The early morning sunlight sliced through the towering skyline of the city's financial district as a sleek, obsidian Rolls-Royce Phantom glided silently to a stop in front of the prestigious Wyndham Royale Hotel. Its presence was elegant yet commanding, the kind of vehicle that turned heads without trying. From the driver's side, a poised black woman in a tailored cream suit stepped out, her demeanor calm, composed, and unmistakably self-assured. She was in her mid-forties, with smooth caramel skin and sharp eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses. As she adjusted the strap of her black leather bag and locked the car, she hadn't even taken 3 steps toward the hotel entrance before a sharp voice cut through the air like a whip. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you. Now." She turned slowly to find a tall, broad-shouldered white police officer storming toward her. His badge gleamed in the morning light, but his face carried an unmistakable sneer of contempt. He glanced at her car, then at her appearance, making no effort to hide his assumptions. "This isn't a public parking lot," he said, voice loud enough to draw the attention of passersby. "You can't just park here and hang around like this." The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "I'm staying at this hotel," she replied, her voice soft but firm. She held up her room card. "I just stepped out for a meeting and came back." But the officer wasn't listening. Instead, he glanced toward the hotel lobby, as if searching for validation, then back to her. "I don't care who you say you are. You look suspicious. I've had reports of loitering and theft in this area." Her brows furrowed ever so slightly, but she remained composed. "You're mistaken. I have a reservation here under my name. You can confirm it at the front desk." Her calmness only seemed to aggravate him more. "You don't tell me what to do," he barked. "I know the law. You don't belong here." A few people had begun to slow down, watching the scene unfold with widened eyes. A young couple across the street began recording discreetly with their phone. The tension in the air grew thicker with every second. The woman took a step back, gesturing toward the entrance. "Let's go in together and clear this up." The officer scoffed, stepping forward quickly. "Don't make a scene. Turn around," hands on the hood of the car. "Excuse me?" she asked, stunned. But before she could say more, he grabbed her arm roughly and pushed her back against her own car. "I said hands on the hood," he shouted. "You're resisting an officer." "I'm not resisting," she started. But her words were cut short as he kicked the back of her leg to force her into position. A gasp shot through the watching crowd. The woman winced but still didn't scream. She kept her head down, eyes narrowed, as her breath came short with the humiliation. It was clear this wasn't a mistake. It was profiling, plain and simple. Another man in the crowd stepped forward. "Hey, what are you doing?" "She didn't do anything," the bystander shouted. The officer turned on him. "Step back or you'll be arrested for obstruction." The woman's hands trembled slightly as they pressed against the cold metal of her own car. A tear escaped down her cheek. Not from pain, but from rage she had to bury to survive the moment. She had faced racism before, but this was a different kind of public degradation, one she hadn't felt in decades. Moments later, hotel staff rushed out the entrance. The front desk manager, a nervous man in a gray suit, approached and looked between the officer and the woman. "Is everything all right here, Officer Henson? This woman is trespassing and failed to comply," he said, not even glancing at the woman as he spoke. "She claims she has a reservation here." The manager looked confused, hesitant. Do you have ID, ma'am?" The woman didn't answer. She simply looked up from the hood of her car with fire in her eyes. As the officer yanked her wrist to put on cuffs, a security guard finally intervened. "Wait, let's confirm her name before anything else." The woman turned her head, and with a cold steadiness, said, "Go ahead. My name is Alana Royce." The name triggered something in the receptionist who had just stepped outside behind the manager. Her eyes widened slightly, recognition flickering in her gaze. "Alana Royce?" she whispered to herself. The name sounded familiar, very familiar. But before she could speak, Officer Henson tightened the grip on the cuffs and muttered, Doesn't matter what name she uses. You can't buy your way out of breaking the law. More people had begun recording. Some shouting, others just staring in shock. The moment stretched on, frozen in time. The wealthy black woman in heels and pearls pinned against her luxury car by a white cop on a power trip. From an upper floor of the hotel, obscured by tinted glass, a figure watched. He had seen everything, from the moment Alana pulled up to the violent escalation that followed. He stood silently, rage and disbelief churning beneath the surface, but said nothing. Not yet. His time would come. Down below, as Officer Henson finally released her wrists. After belated confirmation that yes, Alana Royce was not only a guest but a VIP, the damage had already been done. Alana said nothing as she walked silently into the lobby, her back straight and head high, the sting of public humiliation etched into her every step. Inside the polished marble lobby of the Wyndham Royale, the aftermath of the altercation outside still pulsed in the air like static electricity. Guests whispered in corners, glancing toward the revolving doors as if expecting more drama to follow. Alana Royce stood at the reception desk, her jaw tight and her presence unwavering. But the flush on her cheek and the faint smudge on her pristine blazer betrayed the indignity she had just endured. The general manager, Patrick Langford, a man known more for maintaining image than seeking justice, approached her with a rehearsed apology and stiff smile. "Ms. Royce, we deeply regret the misunderstanding. Please allow us to offer you a sweet upgrade and complimentary dinner for your troubles," he said, voice smooth like oil poured over ice. Alana didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at him, her silence louder than any outburst. "I'm fine in my original suite," she finally said, not even bothering to mask the disdain in her tone. "But I suggest your staff, and your friends in uniform, learn to treat your guests with something that resembles dignity." Meanwhile, behind the front desk, a young receptionist named Tessa struggled to focus on her computer screen. The name, Alana Royce, rattled in her brain like a loose puzzle piece she couldn't quite place. She had heard it before, seen it maybe in an article or a video. As Alana disappeared into the elevator, flanked by a silent bellhop and two more nervous staff members, Tessa's curiosity got the best of her. She minimized the booking software and opened her browser. A quick search for Alana Royce brought up a series of results that made her heart skip. There she was on the cover of Forbes, standing in front of a tech campus, headlined, "The Quiet Billionaire: How Alana Royce Built an Empire from Scratch." A slideshow of images followed, Alana shaking hands with global leaders, speaking at UN summits, donating millions to educational programs for underprivileged youth. And yet, not one person, not even Langford, had recognized her. Tessa glanced up from the monitor and looked toward the now empty lobby where the incident had played out. Her stomach turned as the realization hit her. A billionaire philanthropist, a woman who had likely donated more to the city than half the board members of the hotel combined, had just been publicly humiliated and manhandled like a criminal. And no one knew, or worse, they didn't care. She clicked on another article, one that detailed how Alana Royce had refused to take her company public to avoid losing control over its values. How she insisted on hiring from marginalized communities and paid her employees double the industry average. Tessa's hands trembled on the mouse as the pieces came together. She leaned toward her colleague at the next terminal, whispering, "Did you see what just happened outside?" The other woman, busy with check-ins, shrugged. "Just another crazy guest, I guess. I heard she was yelling at a cop or something." Tessa frowned. "No, I think we just messed up. Big time." Upstairs, Alana entered her suite, not saying a word to the bellhop who opened the door. Once inside, she exhaled deeply, allowing her composure to crack only slightly. Her hands were still shaking. She walked toward the large window, overlooking the city that had once celebrated her as a hometown success story. Now, that same city had treated her like a trespasser. Her phone buzzed with missed calls and texts. Her assistant, legal advisor, and members of her board already reaching out after the video of the incident began circulating online. A journalist she knew had already sent a message. "Alana, saw what happened. I have a copy of the footage. Are you okay? Want to comment?" She put the phone down without answering. "Not yet." She needed time. This wasn't the first time she had been underestimated. But this was the first time it had been caught in such brutal, undeniable clarity, captured by multiple angles, streamed and shared in real time. Back in the lobby, Patrick Langford was holding a private meeting in his office with Officer Henson, who had been asked to stay for a discreet debriefing. "You said she was loitering," Langford muttered, pouring himself a glass of water with a hand that slightly trembled. "Now it turns out she's worth more than the entire building." Henson rolled his eyes. "She had attitude, looked out of place. I didn't do anything outside of protocol." Langford set the glass down harder than intended. "Kicking her? Handcuffing her in broad daylight? This isn't just a PR nightmare. It's a scandal waiting to explode." Henson leaned back. "Then maybe your staff should have warned me who she was." "She shouldn't have to be someone," Langford snapped. "She could have been anyone and you'd still be out of line." The tension grew thick, and Langford's eyes darted toward the window as if looking for an escape. Outside the office, Tessa stood frozen, overhearing just enough to confirm her fears. Her heart raced. She didn't know what she could do, but she knew she had to do something. She returned to her station and began composing an anonymous email to the hotel's board of directors. She attached the Forbes cover and a copy of the lobby camera footage, typing, "You may want to know how one of your most valuable guests was just treated." Upstairs, Alana received a knock on the door. It was room service, sent by the hotel as an apology gesture. She accepted it without expression and closed the door behind her. Sitting down at the table, she unfolded the silver domes covering her untouched meal. The scent of truffle risotto and grilled vegetables filled the room, but her appetite was gone. What filled her wasn't hunger. It was a slow, simmering resolve. Meanwhile, a new email pinged in the inbox of someone far above Langford's pay grade. A board member recognized the name instantly and dialed the hotel's direct line. "This is Martin Kessler. I need to speak with your GM immediately," the voice said coldly. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career." From the shaded luxury of the hotel's top-floor executive lounge, concealed by tinted glass and minimalist decor, Julian Mercer stood with a steely gaze fixed on the chaos unfolding below. The private suite was soundproofed from the world, but the images spoke volumes. He had watched the entire scene play out, from the moment Alana Royce parked her Rolls-Royce, to the instant Officer Henson raised his voice, to that horrific moment where her knee buckled from the force of his kick. Mercer hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but inside, a storm had been building. He knew Alana well, not just professionally but personally. They had shared stages at global tech conferences, sat across from each other in closed-door policy summits, and traded war stories over drinks about building empires while being underestimated. He knew exactly who she was and, more importantly, what she meant to the future of the tech industry, and to millions of young entrepreneurs of color who saw her as a beacon. And now, she had been assaulted in broad daylight, humiliated like a common criminal, in his city, in a hotel he quietly held equity in. Julian paced the lounge, the faint hum of his security details' comms buzzing in his ear. His assistant, Lena, stood by the bar, watching him carefully, knowing better than to speak unless addressed. "Start a silent response protocol," he finally said, voice low but sharp. "Pull every piece of footage outside lobby elevator. I want timestamps. I want facial recognition run on that officer. Get me his file." Lena nodded and moved swiftly, pulling a tablet from her bag and activating the encrypted network they used for crisis containment. "And Lena," Julian added, his eyes still on the window, "notify all major outlets. No names yet, just a tip. Something happened here. Let the internet do what it does best." He wasn't going to make a public statement. Not yet, but the story had to spread, and fast. It was already moving online, that much was clear. The crowd outside had phones up within seconds. The clip would be viral in under an hour. In the room's corner, Julian's tech chief, Marcus, was already scrubbing through social media, tracking the growth of the hashtag that had just emerged. #JusticeForAlana. "It's moving fast," he said. "One video already hit 50,000 views in the last 20 minutes. Looks like a teenager posted it on TikTok with the caption, "Cops really did this to a woman in a Chanel suit." Julian allowed himself a bitter smirk. "Good," he said. "Let it spread." He wasn't after revenge. Not yet. This wasn't about public takedowns or ego-driven responses. This was about leverage. About making sure that when Alana chose to speak, the world would already be listening. And if she didn't choose to speak, well, then he'd make sure the world knew exactly who had stayed silent while she was kicked to the pavement. Meanwhile, in a lower conference room 2 floors beneath, executives from an international startup incubator were wrapping up a meeting. One of them, a young South Asian woman named Priya, refreshed her newsfeed out of habit and froze. The video autoplayed. A familiar face, a voice yelling, a foot slamming into a black woman's leg. Then the subtitle caught her eye. "Happening now outside the Wyndham." She gasped audibly, prompting the others to look. In minutes, what was supposed to be a strategy meeting became a full-blown media triage as people recognized what was happening just floors below them. Mercer's silent broadcast strategy had worked. The online world was igniting. Comments poured in. Activists picked it up. Celebrities began sharing the clip with fire emojis and statements like, "This is why we say nothing's changed." Injustice had rarely moved so quickly. And all the while, Julian Mercer stood in his glass box, hands behind his back, watching the story bloom like a storm cloud. Alana hadn't reached out to him. Not yet. But he knew she wouldn't. She was too proud for that. Too principled. And that's why Julian acted now. Not to protect her, but to protect the ground she would soon choose to stand on. It wasn't about being her savior. It was about clearing the field, so when she stepped forward, nothing would obstruct the impact of her voice. He turned to Lena again. "Tell my board we're freezing all hotel-related partnerships for 72 hours. Any backlash, route it through legal. We'll ride this out." "Should we issue a holding statement?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. Let them scramble. The hotel will try to patch it. The department will start spinning stories. Let them. We'll stay quiet." Lena hesitated, then asked, "Should we let her know you saw it?" Julian's face darkened. "No. If she knows, she'll think I'm trying to protect her. And she doesn't need protecting. Not from me. Not from anyone." On a private server, Julian's team had already compiled metadata from the recordings circulating online. Every phone angle, every detail logged and stored. His AI analysts filtered for voice recognition, facial expressions, and timing. One recording even captured the moment a bystander said, "That's Alana Royce, isn't it?" That was the clip he marked for priority. He leaned over Marcus's shoulder. "Boost this one," he said. "Push it to news aggregators and independent journalists. Make sure it shows up on Reddit threads. Don't watermark it." "On it," Marcus replied. "They won't trace it back." Julian stepped back again, arms crossed, watching as the narrative began to take shape. The system had attacked one of its most successful outliers, and now the system would be forced to explain itself. By mid-afternoon, major outlets had picked up the video. CNN and MSNBC reported it cautiously, omitting names but emphasizing the violent optics. Independent media, however, weren't so careful. "Alana Royce assaulted by police in Midtown," one headline blared. On YouTube, commentary channels were already uploading reaction videos with titles like, "How Racism Just Took a $3 billion Misstep." Julian watched all of it unfold without speaking. He knew Alana wouldn't want pity, but she wouldn't tolerate erasure either. And when the time came for her to respond, he wanted the world primed to listen, not just to her pain but to her power. Still, a seed of unease stirred in him, not because he feared the backlash, but because he knew this incident had touched a nerve far deeper than anyone yet realized. This wasn't just a one-off confrontation. It was a collision between two versions of America, one that still saw black success as an exception, and one that demanded it be seen as the rule. In the silence of the executive lounge, Julian finally poured himself a glass of whiskey and raised it toward the window, a silent toast to a woman who had weathered more than anyone would ever know. "Your move, Alana," he murmured. "The stage is yours." By the time the sun dipped below the city skyline, the video of Alana Royce's public humiliation had crossed oceans, languages, and political boundaries. What began as a shaky, 47-second cell phone clip was now the top trending video on every social media platform, dissected frame by frame on morning shows and digital news panels. The phrase "kicked in a Chanel suit" became a rallying cry. The footage was played alongside her name, side by side with magazine covers, keynote speeches, and charity event appearances. Suddenly, people saw not just the act of violence, but the vastness of the woman it was inflicted upon. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or racial profiling. This was a cultural failure unfolding in real time. Major networks scrambled to keep up, their headlines laced with urgency. Billionaire tech philanthropist Alana Royce assaulted by officer in Midtown. On CNN, anchors struggled to hide their disgust. On Fox News, pundits questioned the full context. But the internet didn't need context anymore. The truth had already outrun the spin. In a modest apartment in Chicago, a high school senior named Malik sat with his grandmother, watching the news loop on TV, her hand over her mouth. "That's the woman who started that coding camp I told you about," Malik whispered. "She paid for the whole thing." In Atlanta, a young woman who had once received a scholarship from Alana's foundation tweeted, "This woman gave me a future, and they treated her like a thief. I'm done being quiet." The sentiment spread like wildfire. Hundreds of tweets, then thousands. #IamAlana started to trend as women of color across the world posted stories of being underestimated, silenced, or profiled despite their achievements. One viral post read, "Imagine building a billion-dollar empire just to be reduced to a suspect because of your skin." That single tweet was shared by Beyoncé, Ava DuVernay, and even a former president. Inside the hotel, panic reigned behind the scenes. The Wyndham Royale's PR team had barricaded themselves in a third-floor conference room, drafting what would be their fourth version of a press release in 6 hours. The earlier ones had been vague, defensive, and instantly torn apart online. Now, the tone was shifting to desperation. "We are appalled and deeply saddened by the events that occurred involving Ms. Alana Royce," the draft began, followed by a paragraph dripping in corporate regret. But it was too late. No carefully worded apology could compete with the image of a woman being kicked into compliance by the state. The general manager, Langford, had received a call from the board earlier that afternoon. His voice had trembled as he muttered, "Yes, I understand," into the phone, already knowing he would be made the fall guy. As for Officer Henson, he had been placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. His union reps tried to spin the incident as protocol enforcement gone wrong, but internal sources leaked documents showing he had 3 previous complaints for excessive force, all involving people of color. That leak was no accident. Julian Mercer's team had orchestrated it precisely. They fed the information through a third-party journalist known for exposing corruption. Within hours, the entire country knew Henson's name, his record, his face. His home address was posted online and then quickly removed, but the damage was done. Protesters gathered outside the Midtown precinct that night, holding candles and signs. Some chanted. Some stood in silence. Others read aloud quotes from Alana's speeches about justice, equity, and dignity. Meanwhile, news vans clogged the curb outside the hotel, forcing staff to use back entrances. The lobby, once a haven of quiet luxury, had become a war zone of camera flashes and angry guests demanding refunds. Celebrities canceled reservations. A-list influencers posted videos saying they'd never stay there again. Within 48 hours, the Wyndham Royale's public ratings plummeted from 5 stars to 2. And yet, through it all, Alana said nothing. She made no statements, declined every interview, and left unanswered the thousands of calls from media, friends, and even senators. She stayed in her suite, watching everything unfold from her floor-to-ceiling windows. Her legal team advised her to speak soon, to control the narrative before it spiraled too far. But Alana knew better. This wasn't about statements, it was about the silence. Her silence was louder than any soundbite. It made people uneasy. It made them lean in. She had learned long ago that power wasn't always what you said. It was when you chose to speak. And when she did, she wouldn't just be reacting. She would be redefining the moment. Julian Mercer continued pulling strings from the shadows, still refusing to speak publicly. But every media fire he helped spark was deliberate. He wanted the world frothing with questions before Alana answered even one. Meanwhile, activists organized a march in her honor, spanning from the hotel to the police headquarters downtown. Organizers expected a few hundred. Over 5,000 showed up. They wore suits, dresses, uniforms. Some carried laptops, others flowers. It wasn't a riot. It was a statement. The wealthiest black woman in America had been treated like a threat, and no one was letting it slide. On the third night after the incident, news broke that Alana Royce had been quietly nominated for a Presidential Medal of Freedom earlier that year. It hadn't been made public, but now the leak turned the narrative into something even bigger, a national reckoning. Public figures lined up to issue apologies. The police commissioner appeared on television, red-faced and grim, calling the video unacceptable and deeply disturbing. But no amount of public groveling could erase the raw footage, the sound of Alana's voice saying calmly, "I'm a guest here," only to be ignored. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been dismissed, degraded, or dehumanized for daring to exist with confidence in a world that saw them as less. Inside her suite, Alana finally stood before her bathroom mirror, adjusting her blouse and reapplying her lipstick. She looked at her reflection with a quiet intensity. She had waited long enough. Her silence had done its work. Now it was time to speak. The chandeliers inside the Wyndham Royale's grand ballroom sparkled with an almost mocking indifference as the night of the long-awaited charity gala arrived. What was originally meant to be an exclusive evening of high society fundraising had now transformed into one of the most anticipated public spectacles of the year. The guest list, once limited to philanthropists and investors, had been quietly expanded to include activists, journalists, and public figures who had taken up Alana Royce's cause with ferocity. The hotel's board, now trembling beneath the weight of scandal and pressure, tried to salvage dignity by proceeding with the gala as planned. But everyone knew this was no longer their event. It was hers. Alana had agreed to attend, not just as a guest, but as the keynote speaker, a decision that had set the media ablaze. No one knew what she would say. Some speculated she would demand resignations. Others feared a lawsuit announcement. But most waited in breathless anticipation for what would be, without a doubt, a defining moment. Alana Royce entered the ballroom without fanfare, dressed in a deep emerald gown that shimmered under the golden lights. Her presence alone silenced the room. She didn't walk like a victim, nor a billionaire, but like a sovereign reclaiming her kingdom. At her side walked no security detail, no entourage, only a quiet, poised strength. People parted before her instinctively, unsure whether to offer apologies or admiration. Julian Mercer watched her arrival from across the room, standing near the back, arms folded, his face unreadable. Their eyes met briefly. No nod, no smile, just recognition. She didn't need him at that moment, and he respected her enough to stay still. As the MC stammered through the evening's announcements, pretending as though the week's events hadn't shattered the foundation of the hotel's brand, all eyes remained glued to Alana. Finally, the time came. Her name echoed through the speakers. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then swelling into something more sincere. She took the stage with slow, deliberate steps. She didn't carry notes. She didn't need a teleprompter. The ballroom fell into a cathedral hush as she stood at the podium and looked out at the faces before her. Some repentant, some embarrassed, others burning with expectation. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," she began, her voice calm and smooth, slicing through the silence. "But sometimes, the world forces your hand." The audience remained still, hypnotized by the gravity in her tone. "For days ago, I pulled up to this very hotel, a place where I've hosted events, funded scholarships, and signed deals that helped build the city's future. I parked my car. I stepped out. I was in heels, a designer suit, and carrying nothing but my room key and my name. And yet, to one man, and to those who stood by watching, I was a threat." Gasps rippled through the crowd, though no one dared interrupt. That man didn't ask my name. He didn't ask if I needed help. He made assumptions, deadly ones. He shoved me. He humiliated me. He kicked me. She paused. But what hurt more than his violence was the silence of everyone else. The hotel staff, the bystanders, the people who saw and did nothing. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The quiet power in her words drew everyone in closer. You see, this isn't just about me. This is about what happens every day in offices, in airports, in neighborhoods, when a black woman walks into a space she was never expected to occupy. Murmurs of agreement echoed softly, heads nodding. I've spent my life building, she continued, not just wealth but bridges, programs, pathways. I've donated millions. I've mentored hundreds. I've kept my head down, played by the rules. But even with all that, even after being named one of the top philanthropists in the world, none of it protected me from the assumption that I didn't belong. She paused again, scanning the crowd. Tears welled in a few guests' eyes. Others looked down, ashamed. Let me be clear. I am not angry at the discomfort my story has caused. I welcome it, because change never comes from silence or safety. It comes from rupture. She took a step away from the podium, untethered from its support. And now that rupture is yours to deal with. Then, from the back of the room, Julian Mercer stepped forward. He didn't walk with urgency, but every eye turned as if they'd been expecting him, dressed in a sharp black suit. He reached the stage and stopped beside her, turning to face the crowd. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just stood there. The symbolism was unmistakable. A titan of industry standing beside her, not as a savior, but as a witness. Alana turned to him slightly. Julian Mercer watched it happen, she said. He saw it from a lounge window and he said nothing, because he knew something I also knew. It wasn't our job to fix the system that broke us. It's our job to make sure it never forgets what it did. Then she looked back at the audience. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. The applause came slowly at first, people hesitant to break the spell. But then it grew into a roaring, standing ovation that shook the chandeliers and rattled the walls. Some clapped out of guilt, others out of admiration, a few out of fear. But all of them understood something fundamental had just shifted. The moment was already going viral, streamed live by attendees. The speech was clipped, subtitled, and posted within minutes. Political commentators called it one of the most important public addresses since Michelle Obama's DNC speech. Civil rights leaders praised it as a blueprint in grace-fueled resistance. And young girls across the country, watching from phones and tablets, saw themselves in her strength. Alana Royce had not only reclaimed her narrative, she had weaponized it. And as the applause died down, and the spotlight dimmed slightly, she stepped off the stage with the same quiet poise she had arrived with. But now the entire world followed her steps. In the weeks that followed Alana Royce's explosive speech at the Wyndham Royale Gala, the world didn't just move on, it shifted. Corporate offices that had once remained eerily silent during social justice controversies suddenly issued internal memos about equity, sensitivity training, and the formation of new diversity boards. Celebrities who had shared the video reached out privately, asking how they could help her mission. But Alana wasn't focused on statements or gestures anymore. She was focused on structure, on consequence, on legacy. The officer who had assaulted her, Patrick Henson, had his badge stripped before a formal internal affairs hearing even began. The city's police commissioner, under immense pressure, gave a grim press conference stating that Henson's actions did not reflect the values of the department. But that wasn't enough for the public. Protests continued, demanding accountability that went beyond suspension or polite condemnation. Civil rights attorneys filed formal complaints, and Alana herself made a rare move. She announced a multi-million-dollar lawsuit not for personal gain, but for the establishment of a permanent police oversight council with independent investigative power. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through legal and political communities. Alana's legal team made it clear this wasn't about money. The damages she sought would be redirected to build a public civil rights litigation fund that would help victims of state violence fight back in court. This move made headlines just as Officer Henson appeared in court for a preliminary hearing. The footage of him entering the courthouse, flanked by his lawyer and a small group of vocal supporters, was a far cry from the proud, sneering face that had gone viral. He didn't speak to the press, and his expression remained hollow. Public sentiment had turned against him completely. His past complaints, once buried under bureaucratic delays, were now at the forefront of every news segment. The city's mayor, facing re-election, threw his weight behind Alana's reform proposal in a desperate attempt to salvage voter trust. Meanwhile, the Wyndham Royale suffered a different kind of downfall. A class action suit emerged from former black employees who claimed years of racial bias and promotion discrimination. One after another, staff members came forward, emboldened by the public spotlight, revealing a pattern of behavior that stained the institution's reputation beyond repair. Bookings plummeted. Conferences were canceled. Investors pulled out. Eventually, the parent company, after mounting financial pressure and boardroom infighting, announced the hotel would be sold. The buyer, revealed in a dramatic press release covered live by national media, was a newly formed ownership group called Reclaim Holdings. At its helm, Alana Royce. When asked why she would purchase the very place where she had been humiliated, she replied simply, "Because ownership changes everything." The hotel underwent an immediate transformation. The lobby that once stood as a symbol of exclusion was redesigned by black architects. Local artists were commissioned to create installations celebrating diversity, resilience, and black excellence. The new hotel slogan, emblazoned on the wall in gilded letters, read, "You belong here." Alana launched a hospitality training program within the hotel, offering internships and scholarships to marginalized youth interested in business and management. The ballroom where she gave her speech became a permanent event space for civic education forums, community projects, and grassroots fundraising. What once reeked of gatekeeping now pulsed with access. And as for Officer Henson, the road ahead was far less triumphant. After being convicted of assault and excessive force, he was sentenced not to prison, but to community restitution under strict supervision. The judge, acknowledging the unprecedented public scrutiny, opted for something more transformative. Henson would be required to participate in and publicly document a rehabilitation program centered around racial bias education, community service, and victim-facing accountability panels. He was ordered to sit across from those he had harmed. Not just Alana, but others who came forward and listen. Not speak, just listen. At first, he resisted. Then, slowly, the weight of his actions began to show. The bravado crumbled. In one recorded session, he looked across the table at a single mother he once wrongfully detained and broke down crying. That moment went viral too, but for different reasons. It sparked debates on justice, on redemption, on whether true accountability could ever be achieved through empathy alone. Alana, for her part, never commented on Henson's journey. She didn't attend his sessions. She didn't watch the coverage. She had no interest in his personal reckoning. Her focus remained on building. Her foundation grew tenfold in support and donations. She was invited to speak at the United Nations, addressing systemic bias in global institutions. Her story was adapted into college curricula across the country. A documentary deal was inked, not by her initiative, but by a filmmaker who had followed the protests and wanted to tell the story not of her pain, but of her power. Young girls with dreams of tech, leadership, or change looked at Alana Royce and saw the impossible made possible. She hadn't just survived injustice. She had rerouted its outcome. In her new office on the top floor of the hotel she now owned, Alana stood at the window once more, looking down at the busy street below. People passed without knowing who she was, and she liked it that way. She didn't need the recognition. She had her peace. Behind her, the walls were lined with photographs of students graduating, families moving into homes purchased through her housing initiative, and a framed copy of the Forbes cover that started it all. She had every reason to feel vindicated, but more than that, she felt rooted, resolved. She hadn't set out to make a statement. She had only demanded respect. And when the world denied her, she took everything they thought they owned and made it hers.